Lately, the Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith story has started to feel less like one marriage problem and more like a long public argument that keeps changing shape. At first, people were mostly watching the marriage itself. Then the conversation moved to the Oscars. Then it moved to Jada's memoir. Then it moved to old interviews, old clips, August Alsina, the children, the separation, and now, reports about Jada possibly having a new crush while Will is still publicly tied to her through marriage and family. That is why this story keeps coming back. It is not because every detail is new. A lot of it has been sitting in public for years. But each time one new report appears, people go back and place it beside everything they already know. They remember the entanglement. They remember Will sitting across from Jada on Red Table Talk. They remember the Oscars. They remember Jada later saying she and Will had been separated since 2016. And they begin asking the same question again. What exactly is this marriage now? To understand why people react so strongly, it helps to start with who Will Smith used to be in the public mind. For a long time, Will was one of the most carefully built stars in Hollywood. He was not just successful, he was dependable. He started as a rapper with DJ Jazzy Jeff, then became the face of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, then moved into films and became one of the biggest actors in the world. His career carried comedy, action, drama, music, family appeal, and commercial power, all at the same time. That kind of public image is rare. Will was not viewed as a distant actor who only appeared when he had a movie to promote. He felt close to the audience. He was funny, energetic, disciplined, and ambitious. He spoke often about work ethic, family, growth, and the importance of becoming the best version of yourself. For years, that image worked because it felt clean. Even when people knew celebrity life was not perfect, Will's version of fame still looked controlled. His marriage to Jada became part of that image. Together, they represented something bigger than a Hollywood couple. They looked like a family brand. Will had his older son, Trey, from his first marriage. And with Jada, he had Jaden and Willow. Over time, the Smith family became known for creativity, unusual parenting ideas, public confidence, and a kind of openness that made them stand out from more traditional celebrity families. But that same openness later became one of the main reasons the public turned on the story. Jada Pinkett Smith had her own identity long before the marriage became the center of public debate. She came from Baltimore, trained in acting and dance, and built a career through shows and films like A Different World, Menace to Society, Set It Off, The Nutty Professor, and later Girls Trip. She was not introduced to the public only as Will Smith's wife. She had her own edge, her own career, and her own history. Still, once she married Will, the scale changed. Will's fame was enormous. His name carried global value. His films made billions. His image was tied to success and family stability. Jada became part of that structure, but she was never fully hidden inside it. She often spoke in a way that was more direct, more emotional, and more willing to challenge the traditional idea of marriage. That difference between them matters. Will's image was built around control. Jada's later public image was built around confession. Will seemed to protect the family picture. Jada often seemed more interested in explaining what was behind it. For some people, that made her honest. For others, it made her reckless. The beginning of their relationship also carried a kind of Hollywood symbolism. Jada met Will in the 1990s when she auditioned for the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. She did not get the role, but the connection remained. Later, after Will's divorce from Cherie Fletcher was finalized, he and Jada began dating. By the end of 1997, they were married, while Jada was pregnant with Jaden. For many years, the public saw that marriage as stable, even if unconventional. But later, Jada revealed that she had not really wanted a wedding. She said she felt pressure, partly because she was pregnant, and that her mother pushed for the marriage. That statement became one of those moments people kept returning to because it seemed to challenge the romantic version of the Smith marriage that had existed for years. It was not just what she said, it was how it sounded beside Will's public image. Will had often spoken about love, family, and partnership in a way that made the marriage seem deeply intentional. So when Jada described the wedding as something she did not truly want, many people did not hear it only as a personal memory. They heard it as a public rejection of the foundation of the relationship. That became the pattern. Jada would explain something from her point of view, often in the language of truth or healing. The public would then ask what that truth did to Will. Did it clarify the marriage, or did it embarrass him? Did it help people understand them, or did it make their private life look unstable? The August Alsina situation made those questions much louder. When August publicly spoke about his relationship with Jada, the story immediately became sensitive because he was not just a random person outside the family circle. He had been connected to the Smith family and was known through Jaden. Jada later confirmed on Red Table Talk that there had been an entanglement during a period when she and Will were separated. She also said August misunderstood the situation around Will's permission. That conversation became one of the defining moments in the public's view of the marriage. The word entanglement went viral, but the larger reaction came from the sight of Will and Jada discussing it together on camera. Many viewers felt Will looked uncomfortable. Some saw pain. Some saw restraint. Others felt the public was reading too much into his face. But either way, that moment changed how people looked at him. Suddenly, Will was not just the confident movie star. He was being seen as a husband whose private pain had become a public topic. The jokes came quickly. The memes spread. But underneath the humor was something more serious. A growing belief that Will was being asked to carry public embarrassment while still protecting the family image. Then came the Oscars. In 2022, Will walked on stage and slapped Chris Rock after a joke about Jada. That moment damaged his reputation in a way no interview ever had. He later resigned from the Academy and was banned from Academy events for 10 years. For some people, the incident looked like a husband defending his wife. For others, it looked like emotional pressure finally breaking in public. When Jada later revealed that she and Will had been separated since 2016, the public began rethinking everything again. That reveal made the Oscars incident harder to understand. It also made people question what the marriage had really been during the years when the public still saw them as a functioning couple. They were legally married, still connected as family, and still publicly associated with each other, but not living in the traditional structure many people had assumed. That is the background behind the latest attention around them. Reports about Jada's alleged interest in someone new, including tabloid claims linking her to Ted Danson as a crush, are not being discussed in isolation. They are being placed inside a much longer story about separation, image, emotional loyalty, and public confusion. Whether the report is serious, exaggerated, or simply gossip, people react because the marriage already feels unresolved. The same applies to headlines suggesting Will is finally pushing back. The public has spent years watching Will speak carefully, apologize publicly, and avoid saying too much about the deeper emotional state of his marriage. So any suggestion that he is attacking back gets attention because it feeds into a wider feeling that Will may have held back more than he has said. That does not mean every rumor should be treated as fact, but it does explain why the story still has pressure. Will and Jada are not just two celebrities living separately while remaining legally married. They are two public figures whose marriage became part of their brand, then became part of their criticism, and now remains one of the most analyzed relationships in modern Hollywood. At this point, the question is no longer whether their marriage is normal. Even they have made it clear that it is not traditional. The real question is how long the public can keep trying to understand a relationship that seems to operate by rules only Will and Jada fully know. And every time a new report appears, that question comes back again. The tension around Will and Jada does not come from one new report. It comes from the feeling that the public has been watching the same marriage from different angles for years, without ever getting a version that feels complete. One moment they appear united. Another moment, Jada explains that they have been separated for years. One moment, Will looks like a man standing by his family. Another moment, people question whether he has been protecting an image that no longer matches the reality. That is why the idea of Will finally responding more directly gets attention. For years, he has often looked like the quieter person in the public story. Jada has spoken more openly about the marriage, the separation, the wedding, her personal growth, and the emotional distance between them. Will has spoken too, but usually in a more controlled way. He has apologized when he needed to. He has tried to keep his career moving. He has shown up for his children, but he has not always answered the deeper public question people keep asking about him. That question is simple. How much of this has he been carrying privately? The public started asking that more seriously after the August Alsina conversation. When Jada confirmed the entanglement, she framed it through separation, healing, and personal pain. But many viewers were not only listening to the explanation, they were watching Will. His face became part of the story. His pauses became part of the story. His silence became part of the story. That is where the public perception began to shift. Before then, Will had already been famous for decades. He had experienced failure, divorce, career pressure, and the normal ups and downs of public life. But this was different because the subject was his dignity inside his own marriage. People were not watching him lose a movie role or face criticism from reviewers. They were watching him sit across from his wife while she discussed a relationship with another man, and that moment stayed with people. It created a public image of Will that he had never really carried before. The confident star now looked vulnerable. The man who had spent years speaking about success, discipline, and emotional control now appeared to be inside a situation he could not fully control. Whether that reading was fair or not, it became powerful because people could see it. That is why later stories about Jada landed so heavily. When old clips resurfaced of her saying she never really wanted a wedding, people placed that beside the entanglement. When she spoke about Will's planned birthday celebration feeling like a display of his ego, people placed that beside the same image of Will looking hurt. When she later revealed that they had been separated since 2016, people placed that beside the Oscars. Each piece made the public go back and rewrite the meaning of the earlier piece. The Oscars incident became the most difficult example of this. At the time, many people read Will's reaction to Chris Rock as a husband defending his wife. Others saw it as a public loss of control. But once Jada revealed that she and Will had already been separated for years, the public began asking why that moment happened with such intensity. That question created another layer of confusion. If they were separated, what kind of emotional bond was still holding them together? If they were not living as a traditional couple, why did Will still react like someone defending the marriage in front of the world? If Jada had already moved into a different understanding of their relationship, was Will in the same place emotionally, or was he still attached to the idea of protecting her? None of these questions has a simple public answer. That is what makes the marriage difficult for outsiders to understand. Will and Jada have used words like partnership, family, and deep love. They have suggested that their bond is larger than a normal marriage arrangement. They are still legally married. They still appear connected through their children. They still show up together when family moments require it. But the public usually understands marriage through clearer terms: together or separated, married or divorced, romantic or finished, publicly united or privately apart. Will and Jada do not fit neatly into those boxes anymore. That lack of clarity keeps the story open, and an open story allows every new rumor to become bigger than it might normally be. That is where the report about Jada's alleged crush enters the conversation. On its own, a claim that Jada has interest in someone else would not necessarily mean much. She and Will have already said enough over the years to show that their marriage does not operate like a traditional one. But because the legal marriage remains, and because Will is still emotionally tied to the family story, any suggestion of Jada looking elsewhere becomes another public test of Will's position. People do not only ask whether Jada is free to have a crush, they ask what it says about Will. They ask whether he is still expected to stand publicly beside a marriage that no longer gives him the same emotional place. They ask whether Jada gets to keep the benefits of the Smith family name while also living separately. They ask whether Will is finally tired of being the person the public sees as patient, embarrassed, or overly loyal. That is why a headline about Will attacking back works so easily. It gives people the emotional answer they have been waiting for. It suggests that Will may finally stop absorbing everything quietly. It suggests that the man who once protected the image may now be willing to challenge it. Even if the wording is exaggerated, the reason it attracts attention is because many viewers already believe Will has been silent for too long. But there is a danger in reading too much into that. Will has not built his public recovery by attacking Jada directly. Since the Oscars, he has had to be careful. His career was damaged, but not destroyed. He returned to major films. He remained financially strong. He stayed visible without making the marriage his only public identity. A direct public attack on Jada could satisfy people online, but it could also pull him deeper into the same personal drama he has spent years trying to move around. That is part of the conflict. The public may want Will to speak with anger, but Will may understand that anger would cost him more than silence. His brand has always depended on control. When he lost control at the Oscars, the result followed him for years. So if he is going to respond to Jada or to the marriage narrative, he has to do it in a way that does not make him look unstable again. Jada's position is also complicated. She has often framed her openness as a path toward truth. From her side, she may believe that speaking honestly about the marriage is necessary because the public already judges her. She may feel that hiding the separation, the emotional distance, or her own desires would only continue a false image. In that sense, her disclosures can be seen as an attempt to reclaim her story. But the criticism comes from the same place every time. People ask whether her truth has been shared with enough care for the people around her. They ask whether Will's image has been repeatedly affected by statements he did not control. They ask whether the language of healing has made it easier to reveal painful things without fully taking responsibility for how those revelations land. This is the line the story keeps walking. On one side, Jada has the right to speak about her own life. On the other side, marriage is not a solo story. When she speaks about the wedding, the separation, the entanglement, or her emotional needs, Will becomes part of the public conversation, even if he says little. That means her truth can become his public burden. The children also remain part of the background. Jaden and Willow are adults now, but the Smith family image was built while they were growing up. Their creativity, freedom, fashion, music, interviews, and public statements were all watched closely because of their parents. So when the marriage is discussed, the public often brings the children back into it. People ask what they saw, what they understood, and how much the family's openness shaped them. That is another reason the story carries pressure. It is not only about a husband and wife. It is about a family brand that once looked powerful and progressive, but later became difficult for people to read. The same openness that made the Smiths seem modern is now the same openness people use to question them. For now, the marriage sits in an unusual place. Will and Jada are still legally tied. They still speak about love and family. They still appear together when the moment calls for it. But the public no longer sees them as a simple couple. People see a relationship full of history, separation, loyalty, resentment, public exposure, and unresolved emotional weight. That is why the new reports do not feel small. A rumored crush becomes part of the marriage debate. A possible response from Will becomes part of a larger question about dignity. A public appearance becomes evidence. A silence becomes evidence. Everything is now interpreted through years of confusion. And that is where the tension remains, between what Will and Jada say their bond is and what the public believes it has been watching all along. The hardest thing about the Will and Jada story is that it no longer feels like a marriage the public is simply observing. It feels like a public record people keep returning to, trying to understand what was real, what was protected, and what was only held together because the family name had become too big to break openly. That is why the latest attention around them lands so strongly. A report about Jada having a new crush would usually be treated as light celebrity gossip. A headline suggesting Will is finally responding would usually pass like any other entertainment story. But with them, nothing stays small anymore. Every new detail gets placed beside years of older tension. The separation since 2016 is still the center of that confusion. Once Jada revealed that she and Will had been living separate lives for years, the public had to rethink the marriage backwards. It was no longer just about what they are now. It became about what they were during the years when they still appeared as a couple in public. People started looking again at interviews, red carpets, family appearances, and the Oscars moment, trying to understand what kind of relationship they had actually been watching. That is where Will's public position becomes complicated. On one hand, he is still one of the most successful entertainers of his generation. His career did not collapse after the Oscars. His earning power remained strong. He returned to major film projects, and his financial position stayed solid because his value was built over decades, not only on one public image. He is not a man without options, influence, or power, but public sympathy does not always follow money. A person can be wealthy and still look emotionally exposed. A person can remain successful and still carry public embarrassment. That is what happened to Will in the eyes of many people. His career may have survived, but the way people looked at his personal life changed. He was no longer only the confident movie star. He became the man many viewers believed had been repeatedly placed in uncomfortable public situations. That belief may not capture the full truth. It may be too simple, but it is now part of the public story. For Jada, the issue is also not simple. She has spent years trying to explain herself in her own words. She has spoken about pain, marriage, self-worth, separation, and the pressure of living inside an image that did not always match her inner life. From her side, the honesty may feel necessary. She may see it as the only way to stop being trapped inside a version of herself that the public created. But the problem is that her truth rarely stays only with her. When she talks about the wedding, Will becomes part of the story. When she talks about the separation, Will becomes part of the story. When she talks about August Alsina, Will becomes part of the story. When reports appear about her romantic interests, Will becomes part of the story again, even if he says nothing. That is the burden of a marriage that became a brand. For years, the Smith family was not only a family, it was an image. It represented success, freedom, emotional openness, and creative confidence. That image helped them. It made them feel different from other Hollywood families. But once the cracks became public, the same image made the fall feel more personal to the audience. People felt as if they had been watching one version of the family while another version existed behind the scenes. That does not mean Will and Jada lied about everything. Relationships can be complicated, couples can be separated, but still deeply connected. A family can live outside traditional rules and still love each other, but the public usually wants clean definitions. It wants to know whether people are together or apart, loyal or disloyal, free or trapped, healing or hurting. Will and Jada do not fit easily into those categories. That is why people keep searching for a final answer. They want Will to say something that makes the story simple. They want him to push back, move on, or clearly define where he stands. They want Jada to explain whether she is still emotionally tied to the marriage or fully living outside it. They want the legal marriage to match the emotional reality. But the Smiths have chosen something more unclear. They remain legally married. They still present themselves as family. They still show up when the children are involved. They still speak about love in a way that suggests the bond has not disappeared. At the same time, they have also described a life that does not look like a traditional marriage. That gap is where the public reaction lives. If Jada is interested in someone else, some people will see it as normal because she and Will have been separated for years. Others will see it as another public slight toward Will because the marriage has not legally ended. If Will responds strongly, some people will celebrate it as long overdue. Others will see it as another emotional reaction that could damage the image he is still trying to rebuild. There is no easy move left for either of them. If Will stays quiet, people say he is accepting too much. If he speaks too directly, people may say he is bitter or unstable. If Jada stays open, people accuse her of exposing too much. If she says nothing, people fill the silence with their own version of events. That is the trap they are in. Their marriage has become so public that even silence has meaning. A public appearance has meaning. A separate room has meaning. A rumored crush has meaning. A smile, a pause, a repost, an old clip, a resurfaced interview. All of it becomes evidence in a public case that never really closes. The long-term question is what this does to Will's legacy. Will Smith's career is too large to be reduced to his marriage. He has music history, television history, film history, and an Oscar-winning performance attached to his name. But the last few years have added another layer to how people understand him. His story is no longer only about ambition and success. It is also about image, pressure, public shame, and the cost of trying to protect a family narrative that was already changing privately. For Jada, the long-term question is different. Her legacy may depend on whether people eventually see her openness as courage or as exposure. Some will say she helped break the false image of perfect celebrity marriage. They will argue that she showed how complicated love can be after years of pain, separation, and personal growth. Others will say she crossed the line too many times and made private matters public in ways that damaged the people closest to her. Both views will likely remain. That is because Jada is not easy to place into one category. She is not simply the villain some people want her to be. She is also not simply the misunderstood truth-teller her defenders see. She is a woman whose need to be understood has repeatedly collided with the public's concern for how Will appears inside her story. And Will is not simply a victim either. He helped build the public image. He stayed inside the arrangement. He participated in the family brand. He made his own choices, including choices that hurt his reputation. But because he has often appeared quieter and more wounded in the public moments people remember most, many viewers have placed him in the role of the person who endured more than he said. That is why the idea of him attacking back carries so much emotional weight. It is not really about aggression. It is about the public wanting to see him reclaim control of the story. People want to know that he still has a voice, that he is not just standing inside Jada's explanations, and that his side of the emotional history has not been completely buried under her version. But a careful response may matter more than a loud one. Will's strongest move may not be to fight Jada in public. It may be to define his life outside the marriage narrative. His career, his children, his personal growth, and his future do not have to remain trapped inside one long public argument. The more he rebuilds without making every step a reaction to Jada, the more control he regains. For Jada, the same kind of clarity may also be necessary. If she wants to live separately, date freely, or redefine her life beyond the marriage, the public may never fully agree with it. But clearer boundaries would reduce the confusion. The issue has never been only that the relationship is unconventional. It is that the public often feels told two things at once, that the marriage is over in practice, but still sacred in meaning. That contradiction keeps the story alive. As they move closer to their next wedding anniversary, the question is not whether they will suddenly become a traditional couple again. That seems unlikely from everything they have already said. The real question is whether they can continue living in this undefined space without every new report becoming another public trial. Because right now, that is what happens. A crush becomes a judgment on Jada. A reaction becomes a test for Will. A public outing becomes a clue. A rumor becomes part of the timeline. Their marriage is no longer only their marriage. It has become one of the clearest examples of how fame can turn private complexity into public confusion. And maybe that is the real conclusion. Will and Jada may understand their bond in a way outsiders never will. They may have made peace with an arrangement that looks strange from the outside, but works for them privately. But because they allowed so much of that private world to become public over the years, the audience now feels entitled to keep asking questions. That is the cost of making a marriage part of a brand. Once people are invited into the story, they do not leave when the story becomes uncomfortable. They keep watching. They keep judging. They keep waiting for someone to finally say the thing that makes everything make sense. But with Will and Jada, that final explanation may never come.